that I shared with you last week. I will review quickly because we're going to continue with that. The approach that I've taken based upon the analysis of please, bad enough 15 minutes later. Menachem Libtag was taking the text of the Torah when it revolves. Efshar? The text of the Torah as it relates the story of the sin of the golden calf. Essentially, he points out, and I've shared that with you, that what we have thought had to be true was simply not found in the text. So many of us have learned that the sin of Bnei Israel were based upon the fact that they made the mistake of miscounting, if you would, that God had told that Moshe would return on the 40th day. They miscounted the 40 days, and the result being that when Moshe did not return on what they thought was the 40th day, they felt that he was gone, and that's what the text says, and therefore they looked to get something else, to get a really, at least I'm not going to say the text, but the assumption was they looked to change God, another God, because God had left them. Which of course is not what the Torah says, and many of you know that, but rather that they looked for someone to replace Moshe, who was no longer there. What we did show you in the text itself is that nowhere does the text mention neither God to Moshe nor Moshe to the people of Israel. Nowhere does it find any source that said that Moshe would return within 40 days or at 40 days. Never mentioned. In fact, what it does mention is in the earlier times when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, he did so for maybe a half a day, a few hours before the pronouncements of the Ten Commandments, where he had to go back and forth and bring discussions from God to the people of Israel. And there it was clear they were up for a number of hours. So when Moshe goes up and does not return, not only not in half a day or a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, but almost 6 weeks he does not return, it was understandable that the people would begin to panic, which is exactly what happened. And as I also suggested, the idea that God is going to destroy all of Israel because they couldn't count the days well is a very difficult concept unless one has a very, very strict idea of who God is. The Ke'arachum v'chanun, known as a merciful God, can imagine that this was a mistake, but it wasn't a mistake that should bring to the destruction of all of Israel. We went on to discuss the different things. Among the things we sort of ended with, and some proofs to show that really all they cared about was to continue going to Egypt. Going from Egypt, going to Eretz Israel. And that without the Malach, this agent that God promised would lead them, whom they thought was Moshe Rabbeinu. And now that he is gone, they were stuck saying, we can't go back to Egypt. God certainly does not want us to do that, nor do we. It makes no sense to stay here and sit and do nothing. It only makes sense to let's go forward, given the fact that going forward to Eretz Yisrael was dependent upon what God promised to give a malach, to send an agent to lead them, and they had none. That was how they got to have the golden calf. Now, together with that, at the end of the class, I showed I touched upon the reason why it was a calf. And I think I quoted it was Ibn Ezra, or maybe the OUisrael. And that is that the idea of a calf came about from Yechezkel, from the first parak in Yechezkel, that we'll be reading as a haftorah for the first day of, for us here for the Shavuot. And the depiction of the throne of God included also that there was kaf ragleihem kaf regel egel, that at the underneath the throne, holding the throne, was a kaf ragleihem, the very palm, if you say, of the foot, was that of a regel egel, was that of the feet of an egel, and said therefore that. I'm going to say exactly who it was. It was a very, very interesting approach, which says that exactly why they thought it was an egel. Why they thought they would make it an egel, which would be the work of God. It would be, in effect, part of the throne of God, and that would be their agent. It was the Chizkuni who came up with that. I wanted to get exactly. It was a very interesting view, but it helps us understand a number of things. Why did they need somebody? Why did they even form something like this? They needed an agent. They needed an agent because God promised them. They also needed it because the only possible logical thing for them to do was to continue on to Eretz Yisrael, and they needed an agent for that. And when out of the flames or fire or whatever came this golden calf, it made sense to them, because if, as we learned in Shemot also, the people of the Zikanim saw Vayechazu et Elokim, that they viewed God, or at least a vision of God or of the throne. And in Yechezkel it says that throne included the feet of the egel, and therefore they thought, okay, this is why logically it should be done. So there you had the thing, but the reason why they had it. Given that we have the right to ask, okay, you defended Israel nicely. Now you got to defend Kaviyachol, God himself. If this was a mistake, and a mistake that they felt was based upon God's visions, why did God get so angry? And here again, we turn to the text, believe it or not, to find out that if you look at the words of the Torah, you find out that it also isn't exactly what we may have been taught. So I'm going to go with that right now. If you recall, I showed you why the Bnei Israel were not setting aside. They were not completely ignoring, nor claiming that there was no God and they needed another God. Not at all. It was a celebration that they had after the calf was formed, where Aaron himself says, Chag Lashem Machar, we'll have a celebration for God, for he had done this for us. And they said, good, Chag Lashem. It wasn't a denial of God or the need of another one, but rather it was, they felt, the work of God here, and therefore they were going to celebrate him. But and by the way, I said at the very end, I showed you that the only other, when you look again, the last time they had a celebration to God was after they heard the Aser HaDibrot Find at the end of Mishpatim, Perak Kaf Gimel. And there it says specifically that they had brought olot, they built altars, they made shlamim, they made different types of sacrifices and offerings to God, and they built the pillars and all of the 12 pillars, if you wish, as a celebration. And what they did in celebrating the God for the golden calf was very much the exact same step for step, just about, of what they had done before. They were just repeating the proper celebration that was done with Moshe and Aaron and all of them, and they were celebrating it. Aaron calls for this celebration and follows those exact steps. It's understandable that they really felt this was a way of celebrating, or at least of sacrificing to God. It was not a denial of God, but what they mistakenly thought was the way that they should celebrate Him and thank Him. Obviously, they were wrong. But again, we go back to, so why was God so angry? And if this approach was such a powerful one, and such a meaningful one, and more importantly, such a logical one, why in the world would God have gotten so angry? And in order to be able to resolve that type of thing, once again, we go into the text. And now, when celebrating God, which I told you is very parallel to what was done earlier, you'll find, I think it's number 5, is it? Yeah, you see in source number 5, the two celebrations, the one that was after the 10 Commandments, after the Aser HaDibrot was pronounced, and then some weeks later, after the Egel HaZahav. Now you think about this, really, if we say Shavuot Vav Sivan was when the Aser HaDibrot happens, and this is now basically 6 weeks later. So they were doing the same thing. At any rate, we read the following, and look at the sources in the number 5, that when they celebrated God, having said Na'aseh v'nishma, and they committed themselves to follow the Aser HaDibrot, it says, again, I said to you in English, early in the morning, Moshe set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He appointed assistants from the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings, and they sacrificed bulls as offerings to Hashem. Taking those things step by step, now Aaron does this after the Egel HaZahav, and look what he does. It says we will get up early in the day, it says he'll said. He built an altar before God, and he had a call for a festival. Early the next day, the people offered up burnt offerings, brought sacrifices, sat down to eat and drink, almost word for word. And even, by the way, the 12 pillars, they saw that the pillar, what resembled, what's supposed to be God, was the golden calf. They said we had everything that we had before. That could have been their logical understanding. So far, again, so what was so terrible? Well, there are 2 words that are mentioned in the celebration after the golden calf that are not found in the first celebration of the Aseret HaDibrot. 2 words. Vayakumu litzachek. Last 2 words that actually depicted this celebration. they rose litzachek. Now, litzchok would mean to laugh. Litzachek is different. Because litzachek doesn't simply mean to laugh. It's to cause laughter. Our second, the forefather Yitzchak was called Yitzchak, right? Because he called Asher Yitzchak li. But they also had a brother by the name of Ishmael. And right, excellent, good. And Sarah saw that Ishmael was mitzachek. He was simply making fun of, teasing.
Mocking.
Mocking is a much better word. You're right. Thank you very much. Yitzchak. So mitzachek means that, but it also means later on in Tanakh, it can often use for not only frivolity and even murder. It means more like licentiousness, wild cheering and crazy celebrating. And what happened, therefore, the Chag Lashem that was proclaimed by Aaron to be a religious, moving, spiritual thanksgiving to God had become into a wild, licentious party. That's what happens. 2 words. And those 2 words is what caused God's anger. And I'll show you the proof of that, by the way. When that party got out of hand, God said, genug, as he would say in good Yiddish. That's enough. I've had it. And in fact, when Moshe comes down the mountain and he is now met with Aaron, he already knows what happened because God had told him. So he says to Aaron, what did these people do to you? That you brought on a terrible sin because of what he did. How can you have done such a thing? You know what Aaron answered? He said, you know well this nation. Ki v'rahu. Not that they were wicked, Ra, but rather they were corrupted. They were twisted. What they thought was Chag Hashem and he thought was Chag Hashem were different things. This was a slave nation who just weeks earlier had spent 200 plus years within the Egyptian culture, religion, exactly how they worshipped, and they were corrupted and twisted. And you look again at the text itself, and it says that very clearly. There we read, sorry, that I can't get the cloak, but yeah, that when Moshe comes down from the mountain, the first person he sees is not Aaron. Aaron, together with Hur, were down with the people. According to the Midrash, Hur was killed. That's why Aaron felt he had to do something. But it's not in the text itself, but that was the accepted view of what happened. But the first one to come down was the only one who was still up on the mountain. Who was still up on the mountain? Anyone know?
Moshe.
Moshe was coming down from the mountain.
Yoshua.
Yoshua, very good. Yoshua was still there waiting for his Rabbi to come down. He was not part of the nation. He was not there, which is interesting in itself. And when he comes down, you know what he says to Moshe, to his Rebbe, he says to him, he says, Kol milchama b'machaneh. I'm on the mountain and the 2-3 million are down there, but I hear the shouting and screams. It sounds like a war cry. There must be somewhere either a war going on, they're dying, or they're killing. It's something. There's a war cry emanating from the camp. He doesn't know about it because he's not there. He just hears the noise and the screaming. And Moshe said, no. Moshe, I've pointed this out, and maybe when we start learning about Yehoshua, I will repeat that. It's a very interesting thing. One of the first things that we read of any words that Yehoshua says are wrong. This great Navi becomes a prophet and everything. First thing he says, oh, it's a war cries over there. And Moshe says, wrong. That's not a war cry. He said, Ein kol ano chalusha ve'ein kol ano gvura, kol ano anochi shomea. He says, this is not the cries of victors or of those who've been defeated. It's just wild yelling, screaming, maybe a cry of distress, but it's not war. And in fact, Moshe's been told about what happened by God. God said they worshiped a golden calf and saying this is God and so on and so forth. And yeah. And when it comes down, he sees it, it says, Vayara Moshe ta'am ki farua hu. He sees the people are farua. Sounds like paro, it's the same letters. Farua means wild. When it comes to cutting the hair, we're told that that word is used for letting the hair grow long, grow wild. Anyway, that's parua. Paruahu. So he comes down, and when he comes down, he shatters the tablets, as it says clearly. The Torah says, look at the eighth source, and see none of you have the source. If you want one, I have it here for you. If you'd like, here. Yeah, of course. Doesn't mean you brought it back. I'm sorry. And there we read what the text says, that when Moshe comes down and he sees what happens, he shatters the tablets, and he says, Vayikach miyadam. I'm sorry, this is not 8. That's what I said last time. 9. Yeah, we'll do 9 in a second. Moshe is told what they are doing, right? And after all, and that's in number 9, right? Hashem spoke to Moshe. He said, hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted basely. They've quickly returned away from the path that I enjoined them. They have made a molten calf and bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. Hashem further said, Moshe, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me let my anger blaze forth against them, so that I can destroy them and make of you a great nation. Okay? Powerful words. So Moshe knows very well what's happening down there. And look what happens. Moshe comes down. He tells him, I know what's happening there. He says anything, he doesn't break the tablets. One would have imagined that he would have done so there in front of God, or at least on the way down from the mountain, knowing that God told him what's going. He doesn't do that. When he saw the golden calf, he doesn't do it. Listen to what the Torah says, and you don't have this, I don't have this over here. This source comes also in the same story of a golden calf. It says, when Moshe came down, Vayar et ha'egel, he saw the calf, umecholot, and he saw the dancing. Vayichar af Moshe. That's when he got angry. He knew about the golden calf. Didn't break it. Didn't get angry. Didn't break the tablets. But when he saw then not just the golden calf, but when he saw umecholot, the wild dancing and the celebration, if you wish, right? Then vayashlech miyadav v'nachot. He didn't simply drop the tablets. He threw them down with great anger, and vayishaber otam, and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. In effect, the events of the golden calf had proven that the slave nation really had not, despite God's miracles, was still had, as we said, they may have left Egypt, but Egypt never left them. And that's what was happening. And so therefore, if you look carefully at these two things, the golden calf and the dancing, we find that the sinful actions were divided into two stages. Certainly, the supposed physical representation of God was wrong, and God says that. Maybe understandable given what I told you before, or what I said about what happened before, why they thought that they should or could do that. But secondly, the frivolous, the thoughtless behavior at this supposedly Chag Lashem, let alone, by the way, was also, they just found out that Moshe had died. You think they wouldn't hold back a little bit of the celebration, right? But that type of wild celebration was neither understandable or excusable. That was the second part of the sin. And because of that, Rabbi Menachem Leibtag says, very well, very powerfully, there's a double response by God, a double punishment, if you wish. And I told you, the punishment, therefore, there was a dual punishment. If we look at the number 9, I think that's what it is, where God says, Lech Reid, here it is. I have it here in the English. Good. Where God says, hurry down for your people whom I brought out of Egypt, like I said, some of that. And so he had two parts of the first statement that he says that Asulahem Egel Masecha, that they made an Egel Masecha. They sinned because they made the form of the calf, the golden calf. That's number one, right? Such a sin was terrible. It would come with a rebuke, perhaps a punishment, but not destruction. Not destruction. But the second part of that statement, where it says that where it goes on that they danced in front of him, and they actually that really refers not just to the korbanot, but rather to the wild behavior that they had. It was that really made God angry, because that reflected Israel's return to Egyptian culture. That was what was unforgivable. Everything God had done. You have a difficulty believing in a God that has no form, that you can't see, that is. I understand that. Even when miracles happen, I understand that. But how can you go back to Egypt? How can you actually go and start behaving according to Egyptian culture, but that was the exact thing that you had rejected and that God had destroyed.
Better the devil you know than the devil you don't know?
No, but it's what you know that is wrong. So it makes no sense that they allow them to do it. And it's exactly at this point that God calls Israel an Am Kishe Oref. It is repeated a number of times throughout the Torah. Am Kishe Oref, I'm sure you know, it means a stiff-necked people. It's stubborn, that's all. I always say, thank God. If we weren't stubborn, we wouldn't. That's right, we wouldn't be here. But to be stubborn against God's will, that's not too good. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why, if you go through the text once again, and you look at what was the punishment God gives a double punishment. Same reason. For the serious sinners, if we can use that term, those who, according to Chazal, actually said that they're the ones who really instigated not the golden calf, but the licentious behavior. For those, God said, God gives them death. 3,000 are put to death for having done that. That's the first. Because, such a rebellious gang could not be forgiven. But the rest of Israel, so Moshe Rabbeinu prays for them, and he receives ultimately a pardon from Hashem, but it won't be that simple. It will not be that simple, and it would not be complete. God says, Uviyom pokdi, when time comes, ufakadati alehem chadatam. On the day when I have to make an account, I'm going to punish them for this sin. Who receives a punishment? It is a delayed punishment because Moshe Rabbeinu was able to get forgiveness from God. And therefore, Bnei Yisrael are able to continue their journey to Eretz Yisrael. But it isn't that simple. It is not that simple. Because there is a very specific punishment that the people were very unhappy about. If we look at the 10th source that I have, there, after giving the punishment and telling the people what the punishment would be, we find in source number 10, as I said, Hashem said to Moshe, okay, I've punished you in effect. Go from here, you and the people that I have brought up from the land of Egypt, go to the land of which I promised or swore to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, telling them that to your offspring I will give it, and I will send a messenger before you. And I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites into a land flowing with milk and honey. And here comes the crucial thing. What was the punishment? But I will not go in your midst. Since you are a stiff-necked people, lest I destroy you on the way. I can't trust that you won't sin again. And given the fact that I'm a Tel Nokem, I'm a punishing God, I can't guarantee that Moshe is going to win and convince me. So best be that I not be with you. I'll give you an agent, maybe it's Moshe, sons, who will lead you. But up until now, even though I promised you there would be an agent who would lead you, and you had, I was with you also. I was in your midst.
In the Mishkan?
That'll happen later on, but yes, that's correct. That's exactly correct.
Well,
Um,
Mishkan, there was a
Mishkan was not yet built. Was not yet built. So that was it. You'll go on. I'll have someone help me, but I ain't going to be there. How do the people react to that? I would imagine, and feel bad, but okay. So we're still going to go to Israel, and you'll be watching us, and we'll have, okay, that's your agent, and I'll be there. That's not what they do, though. They're very upset. That critical condition that I will not go with you cancels the very promise he made to Israel some weeks earlier at Brit Sinai. When he promised there that a malach would lead them, he warned the people to listen to this agent because he says these words. He says, don't sin against this agent because I am with him. I will be with him. So he promised he's going to be with this agent. Now he says, I'll have an agent. I'm not going to be with him. That promise is being broken. The malach will not be the hand of God, but almost like a replacement, if I can say that. That's what God says. He says before that in source 11, we see that God promises earlier in the chapters. He says, I'm going to send you a messenger to guard you in the way, to bring you to the place I've made, and pay heed to him, obey him, don't defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses, since my name is in him. But if you obey him and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. So that is the promise, that I will be with him. And now he says, no, I will not. And this is a problem.
So not that he's not going to be with Moshe.
Um,
Another malach, right?
that was God's decision.
No,
But no, it'll be Moshe, but I'm not going to be with
no,
you.
but the agent he's not sending is not Moshe.
He's sending an agent. It might be Moshe. But whereas before God was with him on the travel, now he's going to be busy doing other things, looking down, but he won't be with them. He won't be Bikir. He won't be in their midst. That was crucial for the people, as we'll see. And that's what happens here. Moshe hears that. And one of the great moments of chutzpah by Moshe Rabbeinu, he refuses to accept that. He refuses. And he threatens God, Kaviyachol. And he says, Em ein panecha holchim al ta'aleinu, he said. If you will not lead us with you, if you are not going to be with us, God, don't bother taking us. I'm not going to let them go. They won't go without you. Unbelievable. But that's what he says. That's what Moshe says to God. I refuse to allow that punishment. I won't accept it, he says. So now God, in effect, is facing a predicament, right? He cannot allow his Shekhinah to return to the people because the people are sinful and he might have to destroy them, right? On the other hand, he cannot allow Israel to remain in the desert because he had to fill the promise he made to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He had to bring them there. But he can't because Moshe told them that he won't lead them unless the Shekhinah is with them. What is he going to do? And this is, I have moments to do it, perhaps the most powerful thing I'm going to tell you today. Unbelievable. God changes history. God decides to get rid of the problem by literally changing history. And that we find at the end I think I had. Do we have it on the back page? Yeah, I have it good on the chart. Good. You see, when I'll do it because we only have a few minutes, so maybe 1, 2, 3 minutes, so I can't do it fully. But I'll finish it with this. The Aser HaDibrot and some statements after and before made it very clear God's what's the word I'm looking for? His justice. God's concept of justice and how he will do it. And it says, in the Aseret HaDibrot, you see it in chart, in fact. On the Aseret HaDibrot, for example, it says that first thing, it says that God is a Kel Kana. He is a vengeful God. It says he's Poked Avon Avot Abanim Shileshin. He is going to punish the future generations of those who listen he says, I'll do kindness to the Ohavai and Shomrei Mitzvotai, the people who listen to me and are fine. And it's a very clear type of justice of it's yes or no. That's it. He says, Ki lo yenakeh Hashem in the third Dibra. God will not forgive anyone who takes his name in vain. And he says in the 23rd chapter also, he says, as we just said, Lo Yisrael lefish achem, my agent is not going to forgive you. He says that, he can't forgive you. And over here you see, he said, he told Moshe, let me get angry with them and destroy them. That's what he says. Along he comes and says, just kidding, I've changed my mind. And he says the most crucial things probably for the ability for us to survive, the survival we have. And what is that? We call it the Yud Gimel Midot, the 13th. Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim B'Rav Chesed V'Emet. You say that on Yom Tov all the time. You say that, why is it so important? Or the Slicha will say, why do you keep me yelling it over and over again on Yom Kippur, my God, at night, and then in the Eilah? We keep on repeating it. Why? Because that's why we survive. Whereas he said about, in the Aser HaDibrot, he's a Kel Kana, vengeful God. Here it says he's a Kel Rachum V'Chanun. He's a merciful God. Where it says he be Poked Avon Avot, he says the Sonai. Here it says, doesn't mention that. He says in the other one, he says Notzeh Chesed La'alafim, not just La'ohavai U'L'Shomrei, not just for those who are good, but to thousands of people. He never limits it to only those who are good. And he's changing his attributes. It says Ki lo yenakeh Hashem, but in the Aser and in the 13 attributes it says V'nakeh lo yenakeh. He will forgive, or sometimes he won't. But you have that option. Before there was no option. And it says there, Lo Yisa Pishachem, then it says, No say avon v'afesha. God will forgive you. And as opposed to saying, Yichar api, I'll get angry and destroy them, he now calls himself an Erech Apayim, a long and merciful God. This was a change of history. That's why this whole story of the golden calf was worth it, if nothing else, to realize this terrible sin eventually, thanks to Moshe Rabbeinu, brought survival for the Jewish nation, and God changes his attribute of only din. It's yes or no to Rachamim. Changes the way he will deal with people, realizing that people are not perfect, and certainly not the Jewish people. And therefore, he now will use his attribute of mercy to forgive Israel. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is the most important lesson we can learn from the story of the golden calf. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry I took a little longer, but that's the sirens, not mine.
Next week is